Unfortunately, what Israel has done during all these years and continues to do even after it signed the Oslo agreements, which says that the final status of Jerusalem will be determined only in the second stage of the negotiations, which will begin this coming May. In spite of that, Israel continues to create facts on the ground to ensure that when they sit on the table, on the negotiating table, the two parties, there will hardly be anything to discuss. East Jerusalem is a term usually used both by Israelis and Palestinians that refers to the territories annexed by Israel in 1967 to the municipal boundaries of West Jerusalem. But in fact, to refer to those territories, to all those areas annexed by Israel as East Jerusalem is a misnomer. Because in fact the vast majority of those areas that were annexed were not part until 67 of East Jerusalem, that until that time was run by Jordan. But rather they were part of 28 villages in the West Bank and also of two municipalities of Bethlehem and Bet Jala. Just to give you an idea of to what extent it's not a proper term, and in fact Israel did not annex only parts of what it's considered both by Israel and by the Palestinians or by the Arab world as such Jerusalem, but rather many areas which have nothing to do with Jerusalem. You can just look at the map. This area is what until 67 was considered West Jerusalem under Israeli control. This was around 38,000 38,000 dunams. And around this area was the area that was East Jerusalem, that was the Jerusalem municipality of Jordan, around 6,000 dunams. Now Israel annexed all this area in 1967, which now it's considered East Jerusalem. This is 70,000 dunams. So we're talking that more than 90% of the area that Israel annexed was until 1967 neither West Jerusalem nor East Jerusalem. So the whole myth of Jerusalem, when we're talking about Jerusalem, it's indivisible and Jerusalem cannot be given back and every single centimeter of this city is holy. We're talking about most of the land, more than 2/3 of this land was not holy at all, was not Jerusalem at all, for neither of the parties involved.
How many villages are there in East Jerusalem? Villages and towns and
well, there are around 30 villages and neighborhoods. I mean, some are neighborhoods, some that are more urbanized, and some are less urbanized. Certainly, the kind of policy that Israel had for all these years, since 1967 until today, ensure that the urbanization was very slow, if existent at all.
Why do Israeli legal authorities avoid using the term annexation? You use the term annexing East Jerusalem, but why do they avoid using the term annexation to describe the status of East Jerusalem?
Oh, because annexation would first of all mean that that this land is that was in fact annexed was before not part of Jerusalem, and all this time the claim of Israel was that the Jordanians had no authority to rule over this area. Secondly, annexation, it's clearly an annexation of occupied territory made by one party. It's clearly a blatant violation of international law. Any occupied territory, and East Jerusalem is considered by the international community as occupied territory, Its status should be determined by the parties involved under negotiation. And what Israel has done in the ground for the last 29 years is basically to try to make everything possible to ensure that this will not be possible, that the negotiations will have only one possible solution, and that is the exclusive sovereignty of Israel, of both East and West Jerusalem.
Is it true that many Israelis will not go into East Jerusalem, or how do Israelis see East Jerusalem as part of their city, or?
Well, this is I think the most clear example that East Jerusalem, it's not one city but two. The fact that if you take any taxi and you ask them to bring you to certain neighborhood in East Jerusalem, they'll say you're crazy. They will not do it if they're from Israelis from West Jerusalem, and you ask them to go to Tzur Bacher or to Bet Hanina or to other places. And that is basically, particularly since the Intifada started, and it continues even today during the peace process. Now, besides that, you ask most Israelis what they think about Jerusalem, and they will say that it's indivisible, that all the city is holy and has to be, and there are all these roots of the Jewish roots, etc. But you ask them, where is Tzur Bacher? And they will say, where? They will think that you're talking about some place near Ramallah or near Bethlehem or near Gaza. They had no idea that many of the neighborhoods, they not only have never been there, but have even don't know where they are in the map. So this, I think, clearly shows that much of the problems, I think, that Jerusalem has are created on myth, on myths that are reinforced by statements and policies of the government throughout all these years. That make it clear that the only, I believe, the only also solution that could come to Jerusalem is to try to deal with the real issues of Jerusalem, of the people living in the city, to put aside the spiritual Jerusalem and to deal with the real Jerusalem that exists of people that are trying to live and to work and to have a normal life here. Well, Palestinians in East Jerusalem are Israeli residents, but they are not necessarily Israeli citizens. In 1967, when these territories were annexed by Israel, Israel gave the option to Palestinians living in the city to choose whether they wanted to become Israeli citizens or to have this status of Israeli residents without getting Israeli citizenship. Most of the Palestinians have chosen not to become citizens because they consider that this was a temporary situation, and therefore that will be solved in the future, and that they will get back Jerusalem either as part of Jordan or as part of an independent state, etc. The status of those residents of Israel, who are not citizens, is it's a status that it's between being a citizen. They do have certain rights that Israeli citizens have and Palestinians in other areas of the occupied territories in the West Bank and Gaza do not have, such as they're able to have social security. They're able, one of the most important things now is that they're able to go freely from East Jerusalem to West Jerusalem or also to the West Bank, etc., at least until a week ago. So as opposed to the Palestinians in the West Bank, that they cannot, during the closure of the borders of Israel and the West Bank and Gaza, they cannot go into Tel Aviv or into East Jerusalem, etc. So that it's an important improvement for the Palestinians, or advantage of the Palestinians living in East Jerusalem. On the other hand, in other areas, the situation is, and particularly since the peace process started, it's even worse than for those that live in other areas of the West Bank. in all the issues of housing and land confiscation. The situation has been much worse, and particularly since the peace process started, is worse now because Israel now has direct control of East Jerusalem as opposed to the other big cities in which now the Palestinian Authority has direct control.
What do you see as the overall goal of Israeli land use policy in East Jerusalem?
Well, the policy, the one and I would say nearly only goal of the policies of all Israeli governments, regardless of whether they were from the Likud or Labor, regardless of who was the mayor during all this year, whether it was Teddy Kollek or now Ehud Olmert, was only one, and that is to preempt any possibility of challenging the exclusive sovereignty of Israel in the whole of Jerusalem, including East Jerusalem and all the territories that are considered, as I said, East Jerusalem. Practically all the policies concerning land expropriation, housing, as well as in many other areas, are related to that overall goal. So what Israel put a lot of efforts is to try to preempt every future effort to question Israel's sovereignty in East Jerusalem.
How much land is available to Palestinians there in East Jerusalem?
Well, more than a third of the land of East Jerusalem, of all the lands that were annexed, of around 70,000 dunams that were annexed in 1967, have been confiscated by Israel for what Israel considers public purposes. In more than this third of the land, around 38,000 housing units have been constructed for Jewish neighborhoods, and not one single housing unit has been constructed in this land confiscated by Israel for Palestinians. This is a clear case of discrimination based on national identity. It's clear that Israel used this in order to try to create facts on the ground, to make East Jerusalem an integral part of West Jerusalem, an integral part of Israel. And in a way, they have indeed succeeded, in the sense that today there are around 21,000 housing units altogether for Palestinians in Jerusalem, which are all in East Jerusalem. There's hardly any in West Jerusalem. And at the same time, there are around 38,000, so it's nearly double, of housing units in East Jerusalem for Jews. Even in demographic terms, since around 2 years ago, Israel has succeeded for the first time to have more Jews in East Jerusalem than Palestinians in East Jerusalem. Now, in terms of the land, what we have is that the 2/3 that remain of East Jerusalem cannot be used. The vast majority of those territories, those areas, cannot be used by the Palestinians because of the kind of policy, of planning policy that Israel had, that was designed not to allow a proper and rational development of those areas for the Palestinians living, for more than 160,000 Palestinians living in the city, but rather to try to choke development. This was done by a series of tactics used by Israel throughout all these years, such as the use of green land, of zoning various areas in East Jerusalem as green land, which in principle, of course, it's important to have green land in any area for environmental issues, environmental needs. But when you examine the various zone planning schemes of East Jerusalem, you see clearly that Israel has used purposely this method in order to try to avoid Palestinians to build houses in their areas, so that they will have housing problems, that they will leave the city. So Israel uses this demographic means as a way of trying to try to get as many Jews in the city and as many Palestinians outside of the city.
Did you mention that only 14% of the land was earmarked for
Yeah.
Palestinians? Could you say something about that?
Yeah. So the result of all the policies of Israel, including land expropriation, zoning, green areas, and also the fact that many of the areas available for Palestinians are usually they are allowed hardly any buildings. That there is a clear discrimination on how many stories or floors are allowed for Palestinians, and anybody that comes to the city sees very clearly that the Palestinian neighborhoods have usually 1 or 2 floors, and the adjacent Jewish neighborhoods have 6 or 7, 8 floors. One is next to the other, so it's not because, and even if the topography is very similar. As a result of this, only it has been calculated at only around 14% of all the land available in East Jerusalem is earmarked for Palestinians in the city. The result of this consistent policy of Israel in terms of land expropriation and housing since 1967 is clear in terms of the demographic trends that have happened in the city, particularly in East Jerusalem, since that time. In 1967, just before the annexation of East Jerusalem, there was hardly any Jew living in East Jerusalem, and there were around 69,000 Palestinians living in the city in East Jerusalem. Today, there are around 160 to 180,000 Palestinians, and around the same number, a little bit even more, of Jews living in that area in East Jerusalem. So Israel has indeed succeeded in that respect to change the demographic balance of the city, particularly the demographic balance of East Jerusalem, for its purposes. Well, there was Israel annexed around 70,000 dunams in 1967, and around a third, or a little bit more than a third, has been since then expropriated. Not all the land has been expropriated, and therefore the vast majority of land Israel even had not to justify, or certainly had not to give compensation for that land. Regarding the land that Israel expropriated,
Maybe you could explain, before you explain the difference between annexing and expropriating.
Okay.
That would be helpful.
Mm-hmm. In 1967, Israel annexed all the area that today we consider East Jerusalem. Annexation means making it part of its sovereign state. That's not necessarily means that the land belongs, the specific area belongs to the state of Israel. It could belong to individuals. It could belong to Jordan or to the Jordanian government. But it was taken by Israel in terms of as a sovereign state. As the land of Tel Aviv, it's part of the sovereign state in Israel, or of West Jerusalem, or any other place in Israel, and of course it does not mean that all that land belongs to the state of Israel, to the government of Israel. It could belong to individuals living in the country. Out of that land, more than a third of that land throughout all these years have been not only annexed, but have been expropriated, have been taken there. And been possessed by Israel, by the state of Israel. That now it belongs, according to Israeli laws, it belongs to the state of Israel, and therefore they could do whatever they want in that land. Not only just consider it part of the sovereign state, but also to build on that land, to demolish any houses that are on that land, etc. For the land expropriated, Israel proposed compensation In most cases, the Palestinians refuse to get compensation because they consider that that would be an acknowledgement that Israel had the right to take this land, which, of course, according to the Palestinian community, the Palestinian people, it's totally unacceptable, and both also according to international law, it's totally unacceptable.
And then, did you mention that of that third that was expropriated, that was principally taken from Arabs and not land held by Jews?
Okay, the vast of that third of the land that was of East Jerusalem that was expropriated, the vast majority of that land belonged to Arabs, either Palestinians or Arabs from other countries, and much of it, apparently the vast majority, although there are not clear figures, belonged to individual Palestinians or Arabs. Not just to state property of Jordan or other countries. So what we have is that Israel, in its policy of land expropriation, it expropriated from the Palestinians practically exclusively, or in order just to give to the Jews exclusively. So the whole rationale for those expropriations, which Israel, in many cases that were appealed to the Israeli Supreme Court, they claim that those expropriations were made for public purposes. So basically, public purposes in the context of Israel's policy of land expropriation in East Jerusalem means the Israeli, or more specifically the Jewish public. So the Palestinians are public only when you expropriate from, but they are not public when you're looking into the needs that they have as people to live in the city. Well, one of the methods that Israel uses to advance its policy of preempting any possibility that that Jerusalem will be divided is the zoning of green areas. And another method that is being used is to use town planning schemes in order to choke developments of the Palestinian neighborhoods and villages that are part of East Jerusalem. The way that Israel does that is, first of all, for years until 1983, Israel did not make even one single town planning scheme for the Palestinian neighborhoods in East Jerusalem. Now, in order to get a permit for a Palestinian that lives in Tuba or Tzur Bacher, in any of these neighborhoods, and wants to get a permit, has to go to the Jerusalem municipality and request a permit to build. Now, until there was no town planning scheme, the Israeli authorities said, I'm sorry, but you cannot build right now because we are not sure whether the place you're planning to build is going to be a road, it's going to be a school, it's going to be what kind of purpose it's going to serve, and therefore you cannot build right now. When we'll have a town planning scheme, then you could maybe build. Sorry. In 1983, the policy changed, and they started to produce and make some planning for town planning schemes for the specific Palestinian neighborhoods. But these plans, instead of allowing a rational way of developing and trying to address the demographic and cultural, economic, social needs of the Palestinian population in the city, basically ensure that the Palestinians will not be able to develop properly by one of the methods that was used for this purpose was to say, well, Palestinians are not used to living in high buildings, and therefore, when we determine how many buildings are going to be in certain neighborhoods, then we usually give them one or two floors for a building. as opposed to, as I said before, the case next door of a Jewish neighborhood which has 6 or 8 floors. Now, the rationale, this justification, or given by the Israeli authorities, it's a clear case of an excuse just to try to go on and to fulfill its policy, its of what they call demographic balance, but what it's in fact ensuring the demographic imbalance in the city in favor of the Jews. One example of that is the fact that if you go to Ramallah or if you go to Gaza, you'll see big buildings with many floors on them, or even in Aram, which is on the other side of the road of the boundaries of East Jerusalem. They are buildings with like several floors. So it sounds pretty strange to say that Palestinians on one side of the street, they are not used to build many floors, and therefore they should have only 1 or 2 floors. And on the other side of the street, since it's not Jerusalem, then they can build as many floors as they want, or at least 6 or 8 floors. The other method used is to say, since we want to maintain this as not very urbanized, as villages, and we want to maintain the character of the village, then we want to maintain a lot of green space. So what Israel uses, it's 2 contradictory principles in order to choke development of the Palestinian villages and neighborhoods in East Jerusalem. On one hand, it says you cannot build much vertically. You cannot build a lot of floors and high ceiling buildings because it's not appropriate for the kind of development that you do. And the kind of houses that Arabs usually have. On the other hand, it does not allow to grow horizontally because, of course, Israel wants to use much of that land that uses it first zones it as green areas, but in fact they're frozen so that afterwards they could be expropriated and used to build Jewish neighborhoods when they're able to bring more Jews into the city. So basically, by using these 2 contradictory principles together, the Israeli governments and the Israeli Jerusalem municipality does not allow any development for Palestinians. Where do they want them to go? They wanted to go underground.
Would you discuss how the closure of Jerusalem is part of this overall policy of, taking Jerusalem, or of creating an undivided Jerusalem?
Well, closing the borders of a country to other countries or to other territories is, according to international law, something that a government or a state has the right to do. The problem is, how do you define those borders? Israel considers that East Jerusalem is an integral part of the State of Israel, in spite of all decisions made by the Security Council, in spite of the fact that it's a clear violation of international law and the opinion of all the international community. And because of doing that, then they consider that since it's an integral part of Israel, they don't allow Palestinians in the West Bank from villages outside of Jerusalem or from Ramallah or from Hebron or other cities to come into East Jerusalem. Now, this is not only a violation of the integrity, integrity of the geographic unity of all the West Bank. The Jerusalem is the hub of the West Bank, economically, culturally, in terms of health services. So for Palestinians not to be able to, from the West Bank and also from Gaza, not to be able to go freely to East Jerusalem, does not mean only a symbolic act. It means that they're not able to go and sell their goods. They're not able to go often to schools in East Jerusalem, and often those that are sick are not able to come and go to the hospitals in East Jerusalem, which are the main hospitals for the Palestinians in the whole occupied territories. The area that is today called by Israel Har Homa, which is in the east, in the south part of East Jerusalem, covers an area of around 1,850 dunams. This area was expropriated by Israel in 1991 during the Likud government, but during all these years, because of various appeals to the Supreme Court, mostly by Palestinians, was not taken was not built, and only recently, around a year ago, the Israeli government decided to build a new Jewish neighborhood in this area. In spite of the fact that much of this land, although not all of it, much of this land was expropriated from Palestinians. Some of that land belonged before to Jews. But in any case, here we have another example in which the housing needs of the Palestinians and the housing conditions of the Palestinians in the city is much worse than the housing conditions of the Jews in the city. Just to give you one figure, around the average density of Jews compared to Palestinians in the city is around 2.2. 2.2. I forgot what.
Persons per room.
What? Persons per room. Thank you. Yeah, it's a basic figure, but I forgot about it. It's the average density for the Palestinians in the city is 2.2 persons per room, as opposed to 1.1 persons per room for the Jews in the city. So if there is one population that needs housing more than any other in the city, it's the Palestinian population. In spite of that, once again, the Israeli government has decided to earmark this land that was expropriated in East Jerusalem for the exclusive use of Jews. Not only that, but the case of the plan in Har Homa is a glaring example of the discriminatory policies that exist in Jerusalem against the Palestinian population. Also, when you look at and how much percent and how many buildings, how many housing units are allowed in a Jewish neighborhood, in a planned new Jewish neighborhood, and in a Palestinian neighborhood. If you look at the area of Har Homa that is planned for a Jewish neighborhood, you have, as I have said, around 1,850 dunams, which are planned, and there are 6,500 units fixed for that to be built in that area. That is around 3.5 units per dunam. If you look at the plan of the neighborhood next to Har Homa, which in terms of topography is very similar to Har Homa, or it's even better for conditions for building housing units, and that is a Palestinian neighborhood or two Palestinian neighborhoods of Tuba, two Palestinian neighborhoods of Tuba and Tzur Bacher. What you see is that in that plan, the figures are very different. What you have is that in an area of around 3,000. Sorry, I have to look again. Okay. What you have in the plan for Tzur Bacher and Tuba is that in an area of 3,600 dunams, the plan stipulates that only around 2,350 units will altogether be built in that area. So what you have is that in the Palestinian neighborhood, the plan stipulates that only 0.6 units per dunam are allowed, and in the Jewish neighborhood, which is next to it, there are around 3.5 units per dunam. We at B'Tselem, the Israeli Information Center for Human Rights in the Occupied Territories, have no position what should be the final status of the city. What we say clearly is that this city is a divided city, that East Jerusalem is under international law occupied territories, and that its final status should be established by the parties involved. And only by the parties involved, and not unilaterally by one of those parties. Unfortunately, what Israel has done during all these years, and continues to do even after it signed the Oslo agreements, which says that the final status of Jerusalem will be determined only in the second stage of the negotiations, which will begin this coming May. In spite of that, Israel continues to create facts on the ground to ensure that when they sit on the table, on the negotiating table, the two parties, there will hardly be anything to discuss, because Israel will create facts on the ground in terms of the demography, in terms of the land use in the city, which makes it very difficult, if not impossible, nearly impossible, to try to take 29 years back and to say, let's see whether we can divide the city and in which way. So all the efforts that Israel, although Israel has signed the Oslo agreements 2 years in September 1993, which said clearly that Jerusalem is to be discussed in the final status. At the same time, in the ground, Israel continues to create facts that will make sure that its view that Jerusalem is an indivisible city will be the one determined by both parties. And I'm afraid that since, as we have seen in the first stage of these negotiations on various issues, we see that Israel is often able to impose its views on the Palestinian Authority, and regardless of whether this imposition is according to standards of both international law and human rights. Systematic policy of discrimination against the Palestinian population in East Jerusalem since 1967 applies not only to land expropriation and housing, but also to all forms of infrastructure in terms of roads, sewage, electricity, etc., etc. I mean, anybody that just visits this city and goes from one neighbor to the other, you doesn't have even to ask, and even if he or she does not understanding Hebrew or Arabic, doesn't have to ask whether they're in a Jewish or a Palestinian neighborhood. It is very clear to anybody, just because the Jewish neighborhoods are usually very well established with roads and with electricity and with flowers and etc. And the Palestinian neighborhoods often have you seem to go back to like 100 years ago, or to places which have not been developed in many places today in the third world. There has been some research done about how much money has been put into East Jerusalem and West Jerusalem, and at least from some of the research done about this is that around between 2 to 12% of all the expenditures were given to the Palestinian neighborhoods, and around 90% to the Jewish neighborhoods, in spite of the fact that around 28% of the Palestinian population in Jerusalem are Palestinians. So the only cases in which Israel has made an exception is in cases in which tourists go through, and then there has been some more efforts by Israel to put some more investment on places near the old city or in the old city, in which in the last 10 or 15 years Israel put more efforts to build on that respect. During the research that we conducted, we looked into all the protocols of the Jerusalem municipality since 1967 until today, and also many documents made by the Israeli government and the Jerusalem municipality in order to try to understand and to substantiate what many already thought, but we thought that was important to try to prove it by official documents. And one of the documents that we found, I think, show clearly that even when the authorities ostensibly relate to the needs of the Palestinian population and try to address them, in fact, they're not always guided by substantive considerations that relate to try to address those needs. This document relates to, it was called the development of the Arab sector in the city. It was made in 1986 and established different criteria according to which the Jerusalem municipality, controlled by Israel, will put money onto various projects in East Jerusalem. And one of those criteria that the Jerusalem municipality decided to establish priorities in East Jerusalem for various projects is what they call the degree of visibility. And they said, and I quote, "The development of the Arab sector has a picture window effect. And it was decided, therefore, that what will be seen by a large number of people, residents, tourists, etc., is important and prominent and receives a grade of 5, and projects that have no impact are graded 1. Those, of course, that were graded 5 then had more possibilities of being funded." In the last few months, Israel has proposed 2 pieces of legislation which, if passed, would maybe make Israel the first country in the 20th century to legalize torture. To legalize those practices that the Israeli security agents, particularly the General Security Service, have used for the last 10 years, which, according to international law, are considered torture and other forms of cruel, inhuman, and degrading treatment. These methods include the violent shaking of the body of the detainees, which has caused already the death of one Palestinian last April, as well as other methods such as sleep deprivation, hooding, subjecting the interrogee to extreme forms of heat or cold and noise, and putting the detainee on various very painful positions. All these methods are used routinely by the GSS against Palestinians, and they have been justified by Israel by considering that this is not torture, but rather what an official commission of inquiry established by the Israeli government in 1987 and headed by Moshe Landau, the former president of the Israeli Supreme Court, called moderate physical pressure and psychological pressure. Now, the specific methods that were sanctioned by this commission to be used by the General Security Service of Israel are secret. However, the evidence gathered by human rights organizations, both B'Tselem and other human rights organizations around the world, international organizations such as Amnesty and Human Rights Watch, and Palestinian organizations as well, shows clearly that Israel, that in the context of Israeli interrogations of Palestinians, the word moderate physical pressure means torture. and the fact that Israel uses this euphemism allows it to go on and using these methods and trying to claim still that what Israel does is not torture. The other method or strategy used in Israel in order to try to address this issue, particularly vis-a-vis the international community, is to say that that there is no choice, that Israel is in a situation in which has to use these methods, particularly against the terrorism of Hamas and other groups. And the case that is usually given is the case of the ticking bomb, the case of the security agents that are holding a terrorist who knows about a bomb that is about to explode any minute, and therefore the only way to try to save innocent life is by using physical force, including torture, against this detainee. Now, there is indeed, unfortunately, there are indeed ticking bombs in this city and in other places in Israel. So Israel indeed has to the right and also the duty to protect its citizens against attacks which can never be justified. On the other hand, Israel uses and manipulates the legitimate concern of security of its citizens in order to try to justify the routine use of torture against practically every Palestinian detainee, which has, in most cases, have nothing to do with cases of ticking bombs or of immediate and concrete danger. The fact that Yitzhak Rabin said a few months before he was assassinated that 8,000 Palestinians have been shaken, have been subjected to this method of interrogation by the GSS, shows clearly that we're not talking about some isolated incidents of torture just in very exceptional circumstances. But rather that torture is used routinely against practically every detainee. It's clear that there were not 8,000 ticking bombs. The vast majority of those cases have been either released with no charges whatsoever, or have been charged with minor offenses, which have nothing to do with the real and genuine concerns of security that Israel has.
Can I ask one more question? That was great. It brought another question to mind. Rabin was also quoted as saying in support of for the Oslo Agreement that it would give the Palestinian Authority the right to go in and to deal with the Palestinians in a way that wouldn't be subject to the scrutiny of the civil rights courts.
Or Beit Salem.
Or Beit Salem.
Yeah, the Supreme Court or Beit Salem.
Yeah,
right.
Something like that. Can you comment on that as part of the Oslo arrangement?
Mm-hmm. Well, basically the Oslo agreement make it easier. Has created what I call an unholy alliance between the Israeli government and the Palestinian Authority that allows both parties to repress various parts of the Palestinian population without respecting their basic rights. We consider that any person that has committed violence, regardless of what their views are, should be brought to justice and should be punished. But that cannot justify the use of torture and cannot, under any circumstances, justify the punishment of innocent people, such as the one that is committed now by Israel on one hand, and at the same time by the Palestinian Authority. The Palestinian Authority has until now proved a very poor record of human rights, to say the least. We may say that the Palestinian Authority has not yet become an independent and sovereign state, but is on its way to becoming already, ironically, a police state, even without having a state, There is hardly any trials made, and the trials that are taking place under the Palestinian Authority are usually just like a mockery of a trial that cannot be considered under any parts of international law considered legal.